The age of amateurism in college sports is dead.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day, and we're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And on today's show, there are some topics that are bigger in the world of college sports than just our beloved Syracuse Orange. Recently, the NCAA settled with the Power 5 athletic conferences, which now allows Power 5 schools to pay their athletes directly. And this, of course, impacts Syracuse because Syracuse is in the ACC and the ACC is in the Power 5. So I will get to later on how it impacts Syracuse and what the Orange can do with the new rules. So this was last Thursday. The NCAA and the Power 5 athletic conferences reached a settlement which would allow athletes to be paid directly by their schools. I'm going to tell you what you need to know and what Syracuse can do about it. Now, this is pending an approval from a federal judge, which I will leave a link in the description below to an NPR article that I found that was very helpful. It will take some time, maybe a few months, for the judge to actually approve this settlement. I mean, this is just legal proceedings. That's just how it works. Before this, and why this is a key distinction, is players could profit off their name, image, and likeness. This is known as NIL. NIL money does not come from the school. The school can help players get NIL and get NIL opportunities. For example, Syracuse can help a player like JJ Starling have an autograph signing, and he would get the money from that. But the school isn't paying JJ Starling in this example, right? They could profit off their name, image, and likeness, but they could not profit off the school's revenue. School cannot pay them. The settlement states that the NCAA will distribute nearly $3 billion to athletes who competed before July of 2021. This is when NIL became available for athletes in all of college sports. It used to be athletes couldn't get any money for competing. At least now they can get NIL and now obviously a salary. So that $3 billion is going to players who are affected by not being able to profit off their name, image, and likeness. The settlement creates a revenue sharing model, which for now means that schools can distribute around $20 million per year to their athletes. It's expected that, I know I mentioned off the top that it only really included Power 5 schools, but it is expected to expand to other schools outside of the Power 5. They're probably going to opt into this deal as well. So I would think, for example, the Big East, which is not in the Power 5, but the Big East schools like UConn, for example, St. John's, right? Those schools you have to figure are going to opt into this as well, because if they don't, they're going to fall behind. A school like Marquette, you kind of have to, or else that $20 million you're not going to get. So I imagine that schools from outside the Power 5 will be able to opt into this settlement. There are a lot of questions, I understand. Who gets the money, right? How do schools keep up, and who has the funds for it? And will women be paid equal to men? There are a lot of Title IX questions regarding this settlement. Well, professor of sports law at Marquette, Matt Mitten is his name. He says, quote, "Those are going to be very important details we're going to have to work out." So my translation of that is, this is a very fluid situation. Again, the NCAA is now allowing colleges to pay their athletes directly. This is brand new territory. This is why I said off the very top that amateurism in college sports is officially dead. They are essentially now semi-professional athletes. That's just how it is with this new settlement. Here is what we know. Here's what we know regarding it. Football and men's basketball players at large programs are most likely to get this $20 million, or at least a large percentage of the $20 million that is available. And this is because those sports generally earn more than any of the other ones. There are exceptions to the rule. I don't have all day to give you exceptions, but the general rule of thumb is that for any big university, the main two moneymakers, the main two revenue generators are your football team and your men's basketball team. So it is likely that those teams are going to receive most of the funding that is available. As far as Title IX and the Title IX questions, Title IX states that scholarships must be handed out in equal proportion to women and men. They must receive an equal proportion of scholarships. However, it does not say that each needs to receive the same amount of funding. Okay? Title IX is mostly about scholarships and equal opportunity, but it does not say that they need to receive the same amount of money. That's the rule. Not saying whether I agree or disagree. I'm just telling you what Title IX says. Now, of course, that could change. That could obviously change. A lawyer who's represented the conferences, he said in the article, I will leave a link in the description below, it's going to be up to each school to decide how they're going to distribute that $20 million. And then later on, it says in the article that there are going to be some schools that will assume that Title IX covers that. So they're going to have to spread it out in equal proportion. And there will be some schools that will try to challenge it and say that Title IX does not cover the $20 million that they have to or that they can distribute to their athletes. Number two of what we know. So that was number one of what we know. Football and men's basketball as of now seems like they will benefit the most off of this deal. Number two, we know that there is a salary cap to this. It's currently set at around 22% of the average revenue earned by the Power 5 conferences. Okay? That's why you get the $20 million as the salary cap. And that is per year. Okay? So each school in the Power 5 gets $20 million to distribute to their athletes because it is part of a proportion for the amount they receive on average revenue. Does that make sense? Is that clear? If you have any questions, leave a comment in the description below and I will try to get to it. Now, this percentage is a lot lower than professional sports. I know in that NPR article, it says that the NBA and the NFL players will receive upwards of 50% of the revenue that is generated by the league. In this, only 22%. So I don't think we're out of the woods just yet. This is just the start. This is just a settlement for now that says 22%. But I imagine the players are going to want even more money, given that what it is in professional sports. You want to try to equal that. That's just the world we're living in. So once again, the age of amateurism in college sports is pretty much dead. The players can profit off their name, image, and likeness, which doesn't come directly from the school. Now, pending an approval from a federal judge, players are going to be essentially receiving paychecks from the university to play their given sport. We know that football and men's basketball players are most likely to benefit off of this, given that they are typically the main revenue generators at any big university. We do not know if Title IX is going to be covered in this. It's possible, but we do not know as of right now. That's going to have to be settled out in court. And we know that there is a salary cap, and I'm going to get into it in the next segment of this podcast. Thank goodness there is a salary cap, which right now is set around $20 million for each Power 5 program, which is 22% of the average revenue earned by every Power 5 school. It is a much lower percentage than professional sports, but it is a start for athletes being paid. Now, coming up, I'm going to talk about why and how this impacts Syracuse athletics. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more in Syracuse football fans. I know we're talking a lot about revenue and everything like that, but let's just dummy it down for a second, okay? Take a deep breath. If you think that Syracuse football next season is going to win 10-plus games, I suggest you going right now on FanDuel and betting Syracuse to win the ACC, currently at plus 4,500, because you pretty much have to win at least 10 games in your conference in order to win the conference outright. So Syracuse football plus 4,500 to win the ACC if you're feeling optimistic. All you got to do is visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the streaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Welcome back, everyone, into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and at the top of the show, we went over the NCAA allowing colleges to pay their players outright. We went over basically what you need to know regarding the settlement and what it essentially created. It's a salary cap system where colleges in the Power 5 can distribute a certain amount of funds to their athletes. This basically means that amateurism, no more. They're semi-professional at this point. That's what these athletes are. Now, we're going to talk about why this impacts Syracuse, and why Syracuse is fortunate, and what the Orange can do with the new rules in place. Because at the end of the day, you can complain about the system all you want. And by the way, I didn't touch on this earlier. No contracts have been put in place yet. There are no contracts or anything like that. It's just a yearly salary cap. You can complain about the system, and I agree with you. It's not great, and it's very fluid. But you got to adapt to it. Adapt or die. That's the system, right? You got to adapt, or you're going to fizzle out. Syracuse is very fortunate in this situation. There are the have schools, and there are the have-not schools. And I believe that Syracuse, despite what many of you might think, is a have school. The reason I say this is because, are they Alabama? No. Are they one of those big SEC programs in general? No, they're not a Georgia. They're not a Big Ten powerhouse like an Ohio State or a Michigan. They're not like that. But at the same time, they have a football team that generates profit, and they have a men's basketball team that generates profit. There are some schools that are not really the case. A lot of them. Syracuse is one of the lucky ones that has both. They might not always be very good, but they're generating revenue. We are also very lucky that there is a salary cap that was put in place. Because when I saw this headline break, I immediately thought to myself, if there is no salary cap, then I believe that 90% of all college athletic programs, including Syracuse, just have to fold. It's not possible. It would not be possible to compete anymore without a salary cap. I mean, you would have like the 10 to 20 schools in the SEC. You would have a few schools in the Big Ten, and that's it. They would be, because those schools have incredible budgets. They're huge. And Syracuse, along with most other universities, would not be able to compete without a salary cap put in place. Now, I know you guys might be thinking, well, Syracuse has a hard time in general with NIL. And here's the deal with NIL. I don't believe there should be a salary cap on NIL because that's players simply being able to profit off themselves. Again, that's not the university paying them. They are aware of how much funds they have in terms of NIL, but they are not paying the players through NIL. Okay, so a player who can earn $5 million off their own name, image, and likeness, why are we going to cap that? That's their money. They're entitled to that. But now what I'm trying to say is, in terms of schools being able to directly pay their players, no school can just be like, hey, we're going to pay you $30 million and being able to do that with a majority of their athletes. They can't. They can't do it. Thank goodness there is a salary cap in that regard. Now, here's the thing here. If Title IX doesn't cover this, and as of now, I don't think they are, if Title IX doesn't cover it, then what Syracuse needs to do is spend most of their money that they have available, which is around $20 million, and they need to spend it on football and men's basketball. That's what they need to do. Those are the sports that have the most ROI, which is return on investment. I'm not saying to not set aside money for the other Olympic sports, but in terms of return on your investment, which is honestly, I get we all want them to win, but return on investment is the most important thing for these universities. They want to be able to make money. That's how they're able to have athletics in first place. They make money. You need to spend most of it on your football and men's basketball programs. Period. So it's also to stay competitive, right? You want to be able to stay competitive in those sports because if you don't, then you're not going to be able to generate money. So you have to be able to put it on football and men's basketball if Title IX's not covering it. And you would also set aside money for lacrosse teams and women's basketball as well. But most of it to football and men's basketball. And now I'm going to do some math for you. I did the math before the show. And full disclosure, I probably prepped for this one more than any other. It was a lot that I had to write down here. So football, you're allowed 85 full scholarships. In men's basketball, you're allowed 13 full scholarships. We've talked about that in length because Syracuse basketball still has 3 available. That is a total of 98 scholarships available among football and men's basketball. Now, let's say Syracuse, and I'm not saying they're going to do this, decided to put all $20 million on football and men's basketball and distribute it evenly. That would mean that it would be $20 million divided by 98, which means each player would receive approximately $200,000 from the university per year. Pretty high number. Now, let's say Syracuse decides to evenly distribute it also among women's basketball, men's lacrosse, and women's lacrosse. Don't think they're going to do that, but let's say they do that. In women's basketball, you're allowed 15 scholarships, which is 2 more than men's basketball. In men's lacrosse, you're allowed 12.6, but for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to say 12. And in women's lacrosse, you're also allowed 12. Now, in lacrosse, it's not usually a full ride. These scholarship money can be distributed among multiple players. So you could take a full ride scholarship and distribute it among 3. So everyone would have a third, if that makes sense. But they're allowed 12 each for men's lacrosse and women's lacrosse. That means the total among the 5 sports that I have listed, football, men's basketball, women's basketball, men's lacrosse, and women's lacrosse, there are a total of about 137 scholarships available. If you do the math, 20 million divided by 137, that is approximately $145,000 per player. If you were to distribute it evenly among those players, everyone who can maintain a scholarship, right? But here's the thing. You cannot give it out evenly. You can't. You can't give every player the same amount of money, and here's why. Let's just say, you know what? In theory, Syracuse could give out one player $20 million. They could do it. Like if LeBron James were available, right? When LeBron James was coming out of high school, he did ultimately decide to go to the NBA. But I imagine in these new rules, he was the best high school prospect basically ever. He would have gotten an obscene amount of money from a university to come. They could, in theory, give $20 million for someone to come to their school. They could. But that's not a good idea because then you wouldn't have any other money for any other player available. So you don't want to do that. And number two, you could, in theory, what I just said, give every player a similar amount of money. So depending on how you distribute it between the teams, $140,000 to $200,000 per player per year. You can't do that either because then how you're going to get the elite players to come? Yeah, you're going to be able to get everyone. You're going to be able to fill out teams. Every player is happy, but you're not getting the elite players, which is what ultimately you need to win in college sports. You need those players who are just simply better than everyone else. So you're not going to do that either if you are distributing equal amount to every single player. Here's how I would distribute it. I would say that the quarterback needs to be given the most, depending on who it is. So in this scenario, it's Kyle McCord. He probably should earn the most out of anyone. It's the quarterback, period. He's got to probably earn the most. It depends on each university. But that's how I would distribute it. Then number two, I would say, who are the best players in the men's basketball team? And 3 through 5 would be best players on women's basketball, men's lacrosse, and women's lacrosse. And I would distribute it that as such. Make sense? Cool. So when I say this is something that every university is going to have to figure out, including Syracuse. What do you give your maximum player? And what do you give your minimum player? I gave you how I would distribute it. Like quarterback would get number 1, and then men's basketball players, the best ones would get 2. But you need to figure out what those number figures are. How much do you want to set aside for one player or for a few players? For Kyle McCord, how much would you set aside of that $20 million? If you give him $1 million, doesn't seem like it would be a whole lot because you still have $19 million left, but that would be 500% more than the average between a football player and a men's basketball player. If the average is $200,000 and you're giving Kyle McCord $1 million, that's 500% more than anyone else, which means the average would be lower for everyone else. Can you do that? Every single university is going to have to adjust to this, and Syracuse is certainly included in that. It's a changing time. It's just the way it is for most of you guys. I know for many of you, my audience is mostly older than me. This is uncharted territory for everyone, and I'm trying to do my best to explain it in a way that makes sense and relate it to you guys as well and how it relates to Syracuse. It seems like we're going to get new updates every few weeks, months, years. But the overall takeaway from this is that the NCAA is finally allowing colleges to pay their players directly, which basically symbolizes that amateur sports, it's no more. And Syracuse is going to have to adapt. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the streaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Welcome back, everyone, into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer. We went over the NCAA allowing players to be paid by their universities. We talked about how Syracuse can adapt to the new system, what I would do in terms of distributing funds, assuming that Title IX is not involved. If Title IX does get involved, then that changes everything. Then it needs to be equal proportion. So there's that. But overall, everything is changing in college sports. players are just now able to profit when they couldn't before. It wasn't until about 3 years ago, July of 2021, where players couldn't get anything, even off their name, image, and likeness. They couldn't profit off of it. Now they can. And that was a few years ago, obviously. And now colleges can pay athletes directly. Syracuse is included because it was among the Power 5 conferences. That was the settlement that was reached. It is probably going to take a couple of months until it's finalized. That's at least what the NPR article said in the description below. A federal judge has to approve it. But it's dead. College sports, amateurism. I shouldn't say college sports are dead. Amateur sports are dead. It is now semi-professional. That is the main takeaway of this. I understand that this is a different podcast than what I usually do, and this covers more than just Syracuse athletics. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. If you like this video, click that like button. And if you really liked it, subscribe to the channel and turn on those notifications. I'm going to be giving more updates if and when more are available. So thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, click that like button. If you really liked it, subscribe to the channel, turn on those notifications. And everyone, take care.